So in this session, I would be demonstrating a small module, namely the employee. So we are using Angular as the front end. So when I open the Angular application, the front end would look like this. So where we have two links like add employee and then employee list. So front end would be developed using Angular 8 and the backend on using Java Spring Boot. So on click of the add employee page, wherein which user can enter the employee details. So here for the purpose of demonstration, just we have taken three fields, namely first name, last name and the email. On submission, it will go to a list page where employee list would be displayed, and list page has other functionalities like deletion, updation, and then viewing the details of an employee. So as far as the architecture is concerned, the front end is Angular and the back end is Spring Boot. So we would be creating different modules here. One module for creating the employee, another module for listing, and another one for viewing the details and the updation. So now we will see like how to develop the backend application. So for developing a backend application, first we have to create a project using start.spring.io. Using the start.spring.io, we can create a project. So once we create a project, we have to mention what are the modules required for this particular project, or we call it as the dependencies. Then we have to download the project structure. So once we download the project structure, this project is created as a Maven project, and we have to import the Maven project into our editor. In this case, IDE. In this case, we are using Eclipse as the IDE. So we'll see, I will explain you how to do it step by step by referring to one particular article. So where in which we would be creating end to end. So first is we have to go to the So we have to go to the spring.io, starter.spring.io. So once we go to the starter.spring.io, then you can so this is the start.spring.io. So we'll be selecting Maven as the project. We'll be selecting language as Java and the default Spring Boot version, like namely 2.2.4, and the group name. So here we can give the any group name like com.example. Anything. So the group name we can give and the artifact name, and then we have to select the dependencies. So what are the dependencies we would be using for this project? For example, we would be using web dependency. Then you have to select the web dependency and JPA, MySQL. So these are the few dependencies, and then generate. So once you generate, it is going to download, it is going to download a project file structure, and then we have to import this as a Maven project. So we have to import this as a Maven project into our Eclipse IDE. So I would be referring to this particular article for doing it step by step. Okay, so this I have already explained, like what is the end-to-end application look like. Okay, so we are ready to now start with the developing the first part of the web application. We will start with the backend programming. Okay, so as part of the backend web application development, so here we are doing a CRUD operation, that is create, read, update, and delete. And this is what is the application would look like. So I would be, if you want to add an employee, we'll be selecting the employee and then we will be mentioning the employee name. So the once I submit, so that employee would be shown here on the screen once we submit that. And this is where the program would be running, the server would be running here. So if we click on the employee list, you would be getting the list of the employees. Okay, so this is what is the list of the employee we have added. So for this, we have to develop the APIs. So REST-based web services we would be doing. Representational state transfer, it is one of the way of developing a application programming interfaces. So when I want to create a employee, I have to use the post method, post, and the URL would be like API slash v1 slash employees. What it is going to do is it is going to create a new employee and the status code would be 201. When I want to get the list of employees, then I would be using the get request API slash v1 dot employees. The get request we would be doing, it is going to show me all the employees. If I want to get a specific employee, then I have to send the particular ID, employee ID. So I would be using API slash v1 slash employees slash ID. So it should be passed as a parameter. If I want to update an employee, then I would be using this particular URL path like API v1 slash employees and again the ID, but the HTTP method would be different, and then delete again. See, the URL for all the three, like namely the get, post, delete is the same, but the HTTP methods are different. So as I was explaining, we are going to go to the http.start.spring.io and then we are selecting the projects. So there is a bit change in the UI here and currently whatever we are having. So the Spring initializer would be like this, but the information what we would be giving is like this. So we are giving the group and the artifact is nothing but the name of your what you can call it as the project name it is going to create, or not the project name, that is the directory structure. It is going to start with that, and then you would be using the dependency. So as a Spring Boot is a opinionated framework where if you want to develop a web application, then it is going to ask you like what are all the dependencies you are looking for. So when we are developing a web application, we are looking for the dependencies like web, JPA, and then MySQL, and then DevTools. Then we have to give all the information. So if I look at this in this way, if I want to create a project, so here I have to say my net.guidelines.springboot2. So it is net dot. So it is net dot guidelines.springboot2 Springboot 2, and then it is Springboot 2 hyphen JPA CRUD example. That is what is the artifact. So it is Springboot 2 hyphen JPA hyphen CRUD hyphen example, and then we have to say generate. Then it is going to create a download the file, and then you can unzip it, and then you can open as a Maven project from your Eclipse IDE. So this is what we would be doing. Okay. So once we have downloaded these files, then we have to look at we have to import this file structure using file, then import, import existing Maven project, and then next and all. I already imported this project, so I am not importing again. So that you have to import. So once you import, you can see the folder structure. So folder structure is like you have, if I compress everything, so it would be like this. So it's src main Java. So in this, these are the folder structure. One is for a controller, exception, CRUD example, model, repository, and then resources, application dot properties, and then the form file. So form.xml is the project object model, so which is very much key. It holds all the dependencies, information about all the dependencies are stored here. So this is what we would be using, and this is what is the project structure. So form.xml.file, form.xml. When you look at the form.xml, so whatever the group name we had given, so it has added into our form, and it is under the group ID, and whatever the name of the artifact we have given ID, that is being actually placed in front of the artifact ID. And this is the name of this project or is like Spring Boot 2. It is JPA CRUD example, whatever the name we had given against the artifact, and then it has downloaded many dependencies. So the starting is the Spring Boot starter parent, and then we have Java version in my current system is like 1.8, and these are all the things which the dependencies. So namely the Spring Boot starter data JPA. This is required to store the Java object into a database using the ORM object relational mapping. And here we are Java persistent API would be using. You would be using. Then Java Boot starter web. This is for the web part, and then you have actuator for monitoring, and then dev tools. The MySQL, we are using the MySQL, so we are asking the Maven to download the MySQL connector, and then the starter text. So when we open the project and when you save this, then or when you open the project at the time only, it is going to actually download many of the dependencies whatever we have mentioned. So all those dependencies mentioned are being downloaded. So this is where it would download all the dependencies. So the form.xml file is the very important file where all the dependencies of your project are being mentioned. So next is we wanted to connect. We wanted to use MySQL as the database. So first thing what you need to do is you need to create a database in MySQL, and then you should be knowing the username and the password to access that particular database. I'm using a XAMPP, so I have my Apache as well as MySQL. It is running, and then I clicked on the admin. When I clicked on the admin, then I would be getting the admin console like this, and I have created a database called Acharya FTP, and we would be using that particular database. I created a database called as Acharya FTP, and this table will automatically get created. So you need not to create a table. First, you have to create a database using this option. You have to create a database, and then you can create a user for that particular database. So you can use the user account to create a user for that particular database. So here I would be mentioning, so in the application.properties, where I would be mentioning which database I would be connecting to, and my database is running by default. MySQL runs on port 3306, and then Acharya FTP, and then the username and the password. So in this case, I have this username and the password, and then we have to mention like dialect. So these are the things which are required. Internally, it uses like Hibernate, and we have to mention these particular property, and also you can see like the app name, the description. So all these things are required. And then the another thing is the server servlet context path. That means when we are running this backend server, the context path, like after localhost, suppose if it is running on 8080, so we'll be giving 8080 slash spring boot cred rest. That is what is called as the servlet context path. So these are all the information which we would be providing here. So now as we are using a JPA, Java Persistent API, that means we have to create a plain old Java object. We call it as Pojo. So which has the attributes of a employee, and then we will be using a setters and getters and a constructor. So the first thing what we are going to create is an employee. So what it represents is this is a Java class which represents the storage in the database. So that means I wanted to store the information about the employee in a table called employees. So this employee class represent the database table which we will be using. So in this case, as we are using JPA, we have to mention this class as an entity class so that you can directly save this class into your database. And it should have a primary key. So here we have this information like these attributes: ID, first name, last name, and the email ID, and a default constructor, and then the another constructor with all these details what we would be sending, like first name, last name, email ID, and all. Then we have what is called as the ID generator. So how am I going to use the getter and setter is there? How am I going to generate my ID? This is the primary key. So we are telling here, look, this database has to generate automatically it has to generate. Strategy is automatic generation and its type is long. Similarly, we will be mentioning the column names of each and every column. So the first name, the name is first name. So setter and getter. So setter is to set the value for that particular attribute and the getter is used to get the value. So then there is a method springer. So what we would be doing is first we would be where we have created. So I already created this. So you have to create this package model and that in that model this employee is there. So if you look at the employee here, so this is what is the. So first you need not to create a table. So when we run this for the first time, like this table gets created in our MySQL. So this entity, this is the entity class which represents the corresponding table, namely the employee. So this is the first thing we would be creating. So then in order to store the data into the database, earlier we used to write a lot of SQL queries. So with the JPA, you need not to write much query. So that particular framework or that particular API will helps us in basically persisting the data. It's nothing but saving the data, retrieving the data, updating and deleting. So first we have to create an interface called as employee repository, which extends JPA repository. JPA repository has all these functionality to store the data and all. So here we have to pass two things. One is the class, which is the class. It is an entity class, and then the what is the primary key of that class. So primary data type of that class. So in our employee class, the name of the class is the employee, and the data type of the primary key is the long. So we have to create an interface, and it has to extend JPA repository. That is the next thing. So here I have created. If you look at the repository, we have created a repository called employee repository. So this is a repository which extends JPA repository. Where is this JPA repository? It is part of the Arc Spring Framework data JPA repository. JPA repository. Here employee is the entity, and then the long is nothing but the primary key of that particular entity. So that is what we have to do. That is the next thing. So once we have done that, we have to write the controller. So basically controller is the one which receives the request and then processes the request. So next we have to develop a controller. So how do we know whether it is a controller or not? Look at the annotation. The annotation is REST controller. It indicates this particular class is a controller class. So if you look at the code, so controller. So in this controller we have employee controller. So this is the employee controller. Here we have mentioned at employee controller and then the request mapping. That means the request will come to this particular server and the port, and then the request should be formed. First we would be having API/v1 and then the corresponding mapping for the request. So in the beginning we have mentioned like we would be using the get request, post request, put request and then delete request. So let us see with this how do we create a First we have to create an employee. How do we create an employee? Then we have to use the post method. So when I want to create an employee, look at the post method. In that post method, you see, like, we would be, the method name is create employees. When we want to create an employee, I have to send the list, send the employee attributes. So I'm sending the employee attribute as a request body, and it has a request body. And then what is that employee? I mean, it is a class. Basically, it represents the employee class. So we are going to send the data in the in a request body, and then it represents the employee. Then we have to just say, in order to save the data, you need not to write all the insert queries and anything here in JPA. Just you have to say employee repository dot save. So what is the employee repository? The interface which you have created, and how this interface would be used here. So here, that particular interface, employee repository is an interface, and employee repository, as it is extending, its reference will be injected into our controller using at AutoWide. This is what is the facility given by the Spring framework. So AutoWide, you need not to get the reference of the interface on your own. The framework takes care of that. So this is what is the AutoWide. So employee repository, as we have shown, it extends the employee repository extends the JPA repository. So it is a JPA repository, and it's the parent classes which has these methods. So whenever I say employee create employee, it saves and it returns. So it basically returns the employee repository that save dot employee. So this is what we would be reading. So the URL is. So now let us say you have done this and you wanted to run this particular application. Then in order to run this application, you have to run a particular file called application.java. You have to right click on this. This is where you have the main method. You have to right click on this. So once you right click on this, yeah, you have to run as Java application. So that is what we have to do. So we have to run it as application interface. So you have to run it as Java application. So once you run it as Java application, it would be running, if everything is fine, it would be running on the port 8080. Now how to test this? In order to test this, you have to use the Postman. So because just we are developing a back-end of programming, we are not developed the front end. So for that, we have to use this tools, Postman. So Postman. So first, in order to save the data, we have to use the post method. So through the post method, we would be saving the data. So in order to save the data using the, I mean, in order to make the request, so here we have to use the post. So this is a post request. So what is the URL we are giving? The local host 8080. What is this Spring Boot CRUD REST? So Spring Boot CRUD REST is nothing but the path we have mentioned, context we have mentioned here. See, servlet context dot path is Spring Boot CRUD REST. That is what we have mentioned. And after that, API v1. What is this API slash v1? API slash v1 is there in the employee controller. It is there, employee controller. In the employee controller, we have request mapping. So this is how the URL is formed. So API slash v1. After that we have employees. So what is this employee? Again, you can see this is the employee. There are two employees. See, like employees. So employees, even for the get request also we have the employees, and then for the post request we have employees. But here the request type is post. That's why. So the request will come here. So we are saying that post. And then now how to basically test this, how to create the data. So then you have to use the body, and in the body, so body JSON, so body raw JSON. So here you can create a data. So once you create a data, so this will get saved into the database. So let us say Samita Prasad, or let us say Ruchir Patil. So it is Ruchir. So when I say send, everything is fine, the data would get saved. So before that, you have to see whether the response has come properly or not. You can see here, see the response is 200, okay, and it is saved. So now you can go to the database. In the database, you can see this data should have inserted into the table. It would have created the table name for the first time if you are doing it, and then it would have inserted the data. So this is what is the employees table. So look at here. So this record is inserted. So the table you need not to create. Table gets created automatically, and then it gets, the data is. So this is how you can create a get request. In the same way, if you look at the documentation, so this is how post request. Suppose if I want to get the list of users, so what is that? We have a special. So here save is the method. Where is the method written? This we have not written. It is in the employee repositories extending the JPA repository. There actually this methods are written. And next we wanted to get the list of employees. Then again the URL is slash employees, and then the method is find all. Find all means it is going to find all the data, and then it is going to return the list of employees. So if you look at the get request, in the get request here again get Spring Boot this thing API employees. So it is going to give me all the employees. So those who have created. Now I already created few employees. So this is what is the one recently I created is here. So this is how we will use the get request. Like this. Now I wanted to find a particular employee, then you have to parse this as a path variable. So in the URL you say employee slash some particular ID, then that is passed as a path. And then there is a method called as find by ID. So the employee ID I pass, so then it is going to get the ID. And then if it is throwing an error, we have to handle it by writing the classes like resource not found exception, and then if it is okay, we are going to return this data. Similarly, if you want to do the update a particular employee, then you have to pass the ID as well as the data updated employee details you have to provide, and then we will be using find by ID first to get the data, and then you have to set for all these attributes whatever you are getting it from the request body, and then we have to create the employee repository dot save. In this case, it knows, oh, there is already a table with this particular name, and then it is going to update that particular record. If it already exists, it is going to update. So that's how we'll be doing the update. And then the last, then if you want to delete, again we have to use pass id as the path variable, and then we have to use again first find by id to check whether this id exists in the database. Next we will be using put a put method, like here it is put in the map. We are going to do the put in the map, and then we are using like find by id, and then we are going to delete this particular record using the delete functionality. So without writing a single line of code in terms of writing the SQLs, we are able to save a data, retrieve the data, and then you can update and then delete data. So this is what is the meaning of a backend programming and or the REST controller. So how do we know REST controller? This is with the annotation REST controller. And if you, yeah, this is how we would be writing as a backend programmer. We would be writing the application programming interface API, and in this case, it is a REST controller. So this is what we would be doing. And we have added something called cross origin, CORS, CORS. This is a special annotation required when we are making the request from a separate server, which is basically maybe on the same machine, maybe on a different machine. Here in this case, on the same machine, we are making the request from the Angular. Then we have to add this cross origin so that the cross origin request could be processed. Otherwise, by default, the cross origin is not set, then it won't allow it won't allow you to access the backend services. So this is how it. So then there is an exception handling. So suppose if there is an exception, exception could be handled. You can write your own exception classes. So this is how you can develop the backend programming. As I told you, if you want to run the application, then you can use the application, right click and then run. It is going to run. So run as the Java application, and this is what you would be getting the update. So in this way, we can create the backend programming, so backend application. So in this section, I explained you how to create a backend programming, and here we are using the Spring Boot. Spring Boot. So thanks for watching this video, and in the next session, we would be a concluding session where we are developing a Angular module, and then we would be doing the end-to-end testing, and then we are interfacing Angular with the Spring Boot. Thanks once again.